A couple more. Intercoolers, tube and fin or bar and plate, which one do you guys prefer and why?
It's a good
Yeah,
one.
this is a good question. So it depends what we're doing. So
Hmm.
if we're building, um, say, like a drag racing car or a dyno car, which we have actually built cars designed to compete on the dyno, and so we actually had different intercooler setups for the various events or conditions that we were driving the car in. So we would go to the Eurotuner Grand Prix, later became the European Car Grand Prix, and uh, that was a kind of a magazine shootout for tuners, and um, we would dyno, drag race, and road course the car. And so we became notorious for winning this event every year for years. And we would prepare the car for each event, and we had different setups. So thankfully, the events were over 3 days, and so we would show up with the car ready to prepare for dyno, and then the event would end, say in the afternoon, and we would spend the rest of the afternoon swapping the car to the drag racing spec, which was day two, and then so on and so forth. But on the dyno, we would always run a big, heavy bar and plate intercooler.
Yep.
The reason we would do that is that bar and plate intercoolers are made from, as the name suggests, bars and plates of billet aluminum, which, uh, as you can imagine, bars and plates of aluminum are pretty heavy. And so you typically end up with a core that's at least double, but maybe up to
Yep.
5 or 6 times heavier than a corresponding tube and fin. Now, if you just, take the hyperbole, tubes and fins, they sound pretty light.
Yeah.
Fish have fins, and birds' feathers are made from tubes, and so are like airplanes. So it's a lighter construction and tube and fin. But the difference, let's say you can make both bar and plate and tube and fin intercoolers flow the same amount. The difference then becomes the thermal mass. Now, bar and plate, because it's heavier, it means there's more material. They're both made out of aluminum. But you might have 2 to 5 times more aluminum in a bar and plate intercooler. And so that means you have a lot of thermal capacity. So that aluminum has the more mass it has, the more heat it can hold. That's just how it works, right? I mean, it's like heating up a thin Teflon pan, coated pan, and a cast iron pan. Cast iron pan is going to take a lot longer to heat up, but once it does, it's going to hold that heat. Now that's good for drag racing because you have a short amount of time where you're putting a ton of heat into the intercooler, and half that time you're not going very fast. So that heat has to go somewhere, and if it can't go to the air, it goes into the aluminum. And then as you get to the end of the drag race, it doesn't matter, but now that intercooler is filled with heat, and then it can shed that heat slowly as you come back and circle. But on a racetrack, one, you don't want to put a bunch of weight on the nose of a race car. And then two, you want that heat to go into the intercooler and shed quickly because you don't need a lot of thermal capacity. The car is moving. You just simply want an intercooler that's designed to be the right size to pull the heat out of the compression heat that's generated from the turbo and shed it to the ambient air as quickly as possible. And so that's how we decide. So if you're making this decision, I would say for a street driven car that you occasionally go to the track with, you're going to want tube and fin. And that's why all the new intercoolers that we're developing right now are all tube and fin.
Yep.
Bar and plate intercoolers are pretty easy and cheap to make because you just stack bars and plates until you get to the size you want, and you're done. But then you're kind of stuck with a heavy intercooler that sheds heat more slowly, that has a lot of thermal capacity, and that's not always what you need when you're driving.
Yeah, and you can see this. I mean, it's we always look at the data and stuff when we're testing all this, but bar and plate stuff's always a much gradualer climb, more gradual climb,
Gradular.
for temperature increases as well as decreases. So you're depending on the application, you may end up with a much hotter average temperature potentially than you would, especially on a racetrack, road course kind of situation. You might with a tube and fin, which is able to much more quickly recover, and you'll see more of an oscillation in those temperatures versus kind of a plateau where it just sits.
And this is why I'm almost always factory intercoolers are tube and fin, and you look at race cars too, they're tube and fin. For all the reasons we just described. But it's funny, we have an air compressor out in the shop, and it has a nice bar and plate intercooler on it. So
There you go.